Most people have no idea that Jesus never originally said the word blessed in the Beatitudes. What he actually spoke was an ancient Aramaic word almost erased from history. That word was Tuba, and its true meaning goes far beyond happiness, luck, or religious blessing. In the ancient mystical tradition, TOOBA described a living, spiritual frequency, a state of alignment capable of changing the inner condition of a human being. But here is what makes this even more disturbing. Jesus repeated Tuba 9 separate times in the Beatitudes, not randomly, not poetically. Each repetition carried a different energetic key connected to the transformation of the soul. The early listeners understood this immediately because Aramaic was a language of vibration before it was a language of doctrine. But over centuries, much of this deeper meaning was flattened into simple translation. What survived was the surface. Tonight, we are going back beneath the surface to uncover what Jesus was truly activating every time he spoke the word Tuba. When modern readers encounter the Beatitudes, they usually interpret them as moral advice. They hear phrases like, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and assume Jesus was simply encouraging humility or kindness. But in the original Aramaic structure, something far more mysterious was taking place. The word translated as blessed was Tuba, and ancient listeners would never have understood it as passive approval from heaven. To them, Tuba described a spiritual condition that altered the internal state of the person receiving it. It was closer to entering alignment with a divine current than receiving a reward. The deeper root of Tuba carries associations with goodness, harmony, ripening, inner expansion, and movement toward divine order. In ancient Near Eastern spirituality, words were not separated from energetic reality. A spoken word was believed to transmit structure into consciousness itself. This is why the Beatitudes were so shocking to those who first heard them. Jesus was not merely comforting suffering people. He was identifying specific inner states capable of opening access to higher spiritual resonance. This changes the entire meaning of abundance. Modern culture associates abundance almost exclusively with material gain, but the Aramaic understanding was radically different. Abundance began as internal coherence. The soul first became ordered internally, and only then could external reality begin reflecting that alignment. According to this ancient perspective, chaos in the outer world often mirrored fragmentation within the spirit itself. When Jesus spoke Tuba over the poor in spirit, the grieving, the merciful, and the pure of heart, he was revealing 9 different pathways back into divine alignment. Each one represented a frequency capable of restoring something fractured within human consciousness. And what most people never discover is that one specific Aramaic vibration was once considered forbidden among certain ancient mystic circles. And in the next chapters, I'll reveal why some believed its sound alone could influence the human mind and spirit. The words of Jesus in Aramaic opened different pathways back to divine alignment. Each one represents a frequency capable of restoring something fragmented in human consciousness. And what most people never discover is that a specific Aramaic vibration was once considered forbidden in certain ancient mystical circles. And in the coming chapters, I will reveal why some believed that its sound alone could influence the human mind and spirit. The first use of Tuba appears in what may be one of the most misunderstood spiritual statements in human history. Blessed are the poor in spirit. For centuries, people interpreted this as weakness, self-denial, or emotional emptiness. But in Aramaic consciousness, the phrase carried an entirely different vibration. The expression poor in spirit referred to a person who had become empty of illusion, someone no longer intoxicated by pride, false identity, or attachment to external power. This state was not seen as failure. It was seen as spiritual openness. In ancient mystical traditions, fullness often prevented transformation because a mind convinced it already possessed truth could no longer receive deeper revelation. The poor in spirit were considered spiritually permeable. Their inner walls had cracked, and through those cracks, higher wisdom could finally enter. This is why the first TOOBA was connected to receptivity. Before abundance could manifest externally, the soul needed to become internally available. The ancient listeners of Jesus would have recognized this immediately, because Aramaic spirituality constantly linked emptiness with preparation. A cup already full could not receive living water, but an emptied vessel could suddenly become a channel for divine flow. There is also a deeper, energetic layer hidden inside this teaching. Many ancient mystics believed that attachment to rigid identity created interference inside the human spirit. The more tightly a person clung to fear, status, superiority, or control, the more fragmented their internal frequency became. But surrender created coherence, and coherence allowed divine order to move through the individual without obstruction. This is why the first TOOBA was never about becoming weak. It was about dissolving internal resistance. According to these ancient teachings, the moment a human being stopped worshiping false certainty, the process of spiritual restoration could finally begin. And this may explain why so many people spend years searching for abundance externally while remaining internally closed to the very frequency capable of transforming their lives. The second TOOBA spoken by Jesus was directed toward those who mourn. And once again, the original Aramaic meaning reaches far beyond ordinary emotional sorrow. Ancient listeners did not hear mourning merely as sadness over personal loss. They understood it as the painful awakening that happens when illusion begins collapsing inside the soul. Mourning represented the moment a person could no longer remain spiritually asleep. This explains why so many mystical traditions viewed tears as sacred. In the ancient world, grief was sometimes described as a form of inner cleansing. The breaking of the heart created movement within the spirit. What had been hardened could soften. What had been buried could rise to the surface, and what had remained hidden beneath distraction and false identity could finally be seen clearly. When Jesus declared TOOBA over those who mourn, he was not glorifying suffering. He was revealing that certain forms of pain become gateways to transformation. Many people attempt to avoid discomfort at all costs, but ancient spiritual teachings often described emotional collapse as the beginning of awakening. A person stripped of illusion became capable of perceiving reality differently. This teaching becomes even more powerful when connected to abundance. Modern culture trains people to associate abundance with accumulation, control, and constant pleasure. But the Aramaic understanding suggested that true abundance could only emerge after false foundations dissolved. A soul trapped in illusion could never sustain divine alignment because its entire inner structure rested upon distortion. Some early mystical communities even believed that grief altered spiritual perception itself. They taught that certain frequencies hidden beneath ordinary awareness could only be accessed after the ego fractured under pressure. This may explain why periods of deep emotional pain often become turning points in human life. Something artificial dies, but something more authentic begins emerging beneath it. And as the Beatitudes continued unfolding, Jesus introduced another frequency of TOOBA, connected not to sorrow, but to controlled power, a force so misunderstood that generations later Most people would confuse it with weakness, when it was actually one of the highest forms of spiritual authority. Be now. Now, you've probably noticed how difficult some of these ancient Aramaic pronunciations are to fully reproduce through AI narration alone. These sounds carry subtle vibrations and meanings that are not easy to preserve just by listening once. That's why I prepared 3 study guides containing the original Aramaic script, pronunciation, support, transliterations, and deeper symbolic interpretations. If you wish to study these teachings more deeply, the link is in the description and pinned comment. The next Tuba, revealed by Jesus, was directed toward the meek, but the modern understanding of meekness barely resembles the original Aramaic vibration behind this teaching. Today, meekness is often associated with passivity, weakness, or submission. Yet ancient listeners would have heard something entirely different. In the Aramaic worldview, meekness described disciplined strength brought into harmony rather than uncontrolled force. The image behind this idea was often compared to a wild horse that had been trained without losing its power. The strength remained fully alive, but it no longer moved chaotically. It became directed, conscious, and internally governed. This was the condition Jesus was identifying through Tuba, a human being capable of carrying power without becoming consumed by it. This teaching becomes extremely important when discussing spiritual abundance. Many people unconsciously sabotage their own lives because they cannot hold power without distortion. The moment influence, money, recognition, or authority enters their reality, internal imbalance begins amplifying outwardly. Ancient mystics believed that external expansion only magnified what already existed within the spirit. If the inner structure lacked harmony, abundance itself could become destructive. The meek were different. Their inner world had become ordered enough to receive greater responsibility without fragmentation. They no longer reacted blindly to emotion, ego, fear, or impulse. Their power moved with restraint and awareness. And according to the Beatitudes, this condition created access to inheritance, not merely material inheritance, but spiritual inheritance connected to alignment with divine order itself. Some early Aramaic traditions taught that uncontrolled human desire created energetic noise inside consciousness. This noise weakened perception and separated individuals from higher wisdom. But disciplined inner stillness created clarity, and clarity allowed divine movement to pass through the individual with far less resistance. This is why the meek were never considered weak in the ancient teachings. They were considered internally mastered. And according to the hidden structure of Tuba, mastery over the self was one of the frequencies most closely connected to lasting spiritual abundance. As the Beatitudes continued, Jesus revealed another frequency of Tuba that ancient listeners would have recognized immediately as a dangerous spiritual hunger. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Modern readers often interpret righteousness as moral behavior or religious obedience. But in the Aramaic understanding, righteousness pointed toward alignment with divine order. It described a soul starving for what is real, pure, and internally true. This hunger was not intellectual curiosity. It was deeper than belief. Ancient mystics compared it to thirst in the desert, a force so intense that it reorganized the entire direction of a person's life. Once this longing awakened inside an individual, ordinary distractions began losing their power. Superficial pleasures no longer satisfied the spirit because something far greater had been activated within consciousness itself. According to ancient teachings, This was one of the most transformative frequencies of Tuba, because desire shapes perception. Human beings move toward whatever they hunger for internally. A soul obsessed with fear becomes trapped inside fear-based reality. A soul consumed by ego eventually loses connection with deeper truth. But a soul longing for divine alignment gradually restructures itself around higher awareness. This may explain why Jesus connected spiritual hunger with fulfillment. Ancient listeners understood that reality often expands in the direction of sustained inner focus. What a person continually seeks begins shaping their perception, decisions, emotional state, and energetic condition. In T's sense, hunger itself became a spiritual force. Many early mystical communities believed the human spirit functioned almost like an instrument, constantly tuning itself toward whatever frequency dominated attention. If attention remained scattered among fear, distraction, and material obsession, internal fragmentation increased. But if the soul became fixed upon divine order, coherence slowly emerged from within. This teaching completely transforms the meaning of abundance. True abundance was never passive accumulation. It was the gradual alignment of the inner world with higher reality. And according to the hidden structure of Tuba, the soul that genuinely hungered for truth would eventually begin attracting conditions aligned with that inner transformation. The final layers of Tuba within the Beatitudes reveal something extraordinary about the teachings of Jesus. Each blessing was never isolated from the others. Together, they formed a progressive map of inner transformation. Spiritual openness, sacred grief, disciplined strength, hunger for divine alignment. Step by step, the Beatitudes describe the reconstruction of human consciousness itself. This is why the original Aramaic language carried such unusual depth. Ancient listeners did not experience these teachings merely as philosophical ideas. They experienced them as living frequencies capable of reshaping the inner structure of the soul. Every repetition of Tuba activated another stage in the journey back toward divine coherence. Over time, much of this deeper meaning became hidden beneath translation. The Beatitudes were reduced to moral instruction, while their energetic architecture slowly disappeared from collective understanding. But beneath the surface, the original pattern still remains intact. And perhaps this explains why these words continue affecting people so deeply, even thousands of years later. Something inside the human spirit still recognizes their resonance. The ancient mystics believed that when a person entered alignment with divine order internally, external reality gradually began reorganizing around that condition. Fear lost authority. Confusion weakened. Destructive patterns started dissolving. The individual no longer searched endlessly for fulfillment outside themselves because the source of abundance had already begun awakening within. This may be the greatest hidden message behind Tuba. Abundance was never merely material. It was the restoration of internal harmony between the human spirit and divine reality. And according to the teachings of Jesus, every soul carried the potential to return to that alignment. Visit Divine Light Academy through the link below to continue your journey with the study guides and explore the living language behind these sacred teachings. And before you leave, comment the word restoration below if you felt a shift in your spirit during this message. We read every response, and your voice strengthens this growing community of light. Before you leave this video, take a moment and tell us in the comments what you felt during this teaching. What shifted inside you? And if these ancient teachings are awakening something deep within you, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the forgotten Aramaic frequencies that were always meant to guide humanity back to truth. We are only beginning to uncover the hidden depth of these ancient frequencies. In the next videos, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic codes connected to spiritual authority, inner transformation, and the forgotten teachings once reserved for the initiated. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you do not miss these revelations. He was revealing 9 different pathways back into divine alignment. Each one represented a frequency capable of restoring something fractured within human consciousness. And what most people never discover is that one specific Aramaic vibration was once considered forbidden among certain ancient mystic circles. And in the next chapters, I'll reveal why some believed its sound alone could influence the human mind and spirit.